There are many myths and exaggerations about Titanic. But this story, the story that you're about to hear, is a true story. It's difficult for us to imagine this now, but between 1914, when the First World War broke out, and the mid-1950s, Titanic was barely talked about. Nowadays, most of us know something about Titanic. When this book was published and the film was made from it, interest in Titanic began to be rekindled. That happened in the mid-50s. At the same time, coincidentally, Noel Rothes died. And she, like almost all the survivors, if not all of them, never talked about what they'd experienced on board Titanic. But in these boxes, which were discovered after she died, were her Titanic papers. There were letters, there were press cuttings, there were evidence to the inquiries, there were pieces of memorabilia which were found, as I say, when she died, by her eldest son, my grandfather. And later, my mother put them into scrapbooks. And after that, I read them. And eventually, I wrote this book. But I first of all developed this talk, and then I wrote the book. So by their early 30s, these two people had spent 10 years doing entirely different things. Thomas Jones had been working his way up through the ranks to the rank of Able Seaman in the Merchant Navy. Noel Rothes had been running Leslie House in Fife in Scotland, which was the family seat then. So these two people could not have been more different. These stairwells illustrate the difference, again, between the different classes and kinds of people on board. If you've seen James Cameron's film Titanic, you will have seen a mock-up, a reproduction of the grand staircase. This, again, is from Olympic. But you might not have noticed the third-class stairwells, which look, I think, very similar to cross-channel ferries today. At the top of those stairwells, there was a very low gate, a gate that you could actually walk over, but there was always, at the top of the third-class stairwells, either a steward or a member of the crew, the deck crew, standing there to make sure that third-class passengers didn't go up into either second or first class. This meant that when Titanic hit the iceberg and people were coming up from third class to get to the boat deck, to get to the lifeboats, they didn't know their way because they hadn't had freedom of access to the whole of the boat. Many of them, as I've said, were emigrants, and so their first language wasn't English, so they didn't understand what they were being asked to do. And as I said, they didn't know their way, and that is the reason that so many of them didn't make it to the boat deck. The signage on Titanic was also only in English, and there wasn't very much of it. But the reason that there were gates across the third class, the tops of the stairwells, was actually not to keep them from the boat deck, to keep them from the lifeboats. It was a result of the then American immigration authorities who, as you know, checked people at Ellis Island. And if anyone was found not to be in a fit and healthy state to enter America, they would be sent back on the ship that they'd come over on at the shipping company's expense. And that's why the shipping companies kept third class down in their own quarters. On Titanic, the quarters were excellent, so I don't suppose they minded until she hit the iceberg. And then they were tremendously disadvantaged because they didn't know their way around the boat. So in this era of optimism and stability and relative peace and prosperity and many inventions, and this absolute faith in science and technology to solve every problem, the White Star Line thought it perfectly reasonable to advertise Titanic and her sister ship Olympic like this. They wrote, "As far as it is possible to do so, these two wonderful vessels are designed to be unsinkable." That's where the unsinkable myth came from her owners. They wrote it in a publicity brochure. And people believed it. People booked passage on Titanic on her maiden voyage, absolutely convinced that this was the first ship that couldn't sink. As you've heard, Thomas Jones was put in command of Lifeboat Number 8. And when they were afloat, he heard Noel Rothes, who by then was one of his passengers, doing her best to comfort the women on board, most of whom were first-class women, passengers, and all of whom, had had to leave behind a husband, a brother, a father, a son, men they loved. Men Noel thought they'd see again because she thought there were enough lifeboats. But they never did. When she tried to comfort them, apart from saying they'll be on later lifeboats, she said things that sounded as though she knew something about boats. She said, "This lifeboat is sturdy. The sea is very calm. It's a very starry night, and so the able seaman will be able to navigate by the stars." And when Thomas Jones heard her saying these things and saw, as he put it, the quiet, determined way she carried herself, he asked her what she knew about boats. I don't know whether she volunteered to take the tiller or he, as you'll see in a minute, put her at the tiller. She says she volunteered in her letter. He says in his interview with the Daily Telegraph that he put her at the tiller. The result is that she did take the tiller, and they worked together that night. In his interview with the Daily Telegraph, this is what he said. He was a Welshman, so if you would like to imagine this in a Welsh accent, please do. The part I love comes near the end, where he says, "She was more of a man than any we had on board, and I put her at the tiller." 3,000 miles away on the other side of the Atlantic, my great-grandmother's 10-year-old son, Malcolm, my grandfather, but he was only 10 then, woke up and told his nanny that he knew his mother was cold and in danger. And when she finally got home to Fife, he told her what had happened to him. And they worked out that the time he woke up was the time she boarded Lifeboat Number 8. And the time he either wouldn't or couldn't go back to sleep before was the time she boarded Carpathia, the rescue ship.
My question sort of follows on from that. And I've known you, well, this whole story has evolved. And I wonder now what the relationship is between you and your great-grandmother. I feel you must have lived in her. I know you're...
It's such a lovely question. I think if she knew I'd written this book, she would be furious with me because she was an extremely modest woman. When one of the first-class stewardesses said to her afterwards, "You know you're going to be famous because you rowed in a boat and you took the tiller and so on," she said, "I hope not. I've done nothing." So I really think she would disapprove of the fact that I've written this book. But I felt so strongly when I was first reading Mum's scrapbooks. She put all the, as you know, all the documents that were in the boxes into scrapbooks. And when I was first reading them, I just thought this story must be told. I felt it really strongly. I haven't ever felt her saying to me, "Why have you done this?" But I honestly do think that if she should walk in that door now, she'd be going, "What have you done? What have you done?" But to answer your question a bit more sensibly, I'm full of admiration and respect for both of them. I've dedicated the book to them both because I think they were extraordinary people.